here we'll be discussing the pattern of the NMAT. Now, NMAT is conducted by the GMAC and is useful when you're applying to colleges under the NMIMS University or certain colleges that are affiliated to the NMAT. Now, if you look at the test and the pattern of the entire test, it is a computer adaptive test. Now, unlike most of the other tests that you will be appearing for, this is a computer adaptive test, which means that every person who will be appearing for the test will be shown a unique paper, which means that depending on your response to the previous question, you will be shown the next question. And depending on your response to that question, you will be shown the next question. And this will keep on happening till the time you reach the end of a particular section. Now, NMAT is conducted over approximately 75 days. So typically it will start somewhere in the month of end of September or beginning of October and will continue till the end of December. Sometimes they might also open additional slots just to accommodate people who might not have been able to book slots earlier. But that is again something which will be on an annual basis, and definitely we will let you know in case there are some changes in this particular mode of delivery. In terms of the sectional range, so unlike other tests, NMAT will not really have a +3 -1 or a +4 -1 kind of a marking scheme. It will have a range along which you would be graded. So your range at a section level will be from 12 to 120 marks. So the maximum grade that you can reach is 120, band that you can reach is 120. The minimum band, the lowest band that you can be at is 12. So on a scale of 112 to 120, you will be graded in terms of the NMAT for each section. And in terms of the overall score, that will essentially be the cumulative score that you would have got, a cumulative grade that you would have got across sections. So let's say, for example, you have got 80, 90 and 100 at the 3 sections that are there. Then you will be graded to, again, 80, 90, 100, which will be added together to form a 270 out of 360 in the overall context. So that's basically what it translates into. Also, you have to understand here that in case you want to clear the NMAT, or if you want to clear the NMAT convincingly, you will have to attempt all the questions. That is purely because the system will be able to figure out what is your level only once you have answered all the questions that are a part of a particular section. So it's very important that you time yourself properly and ensure that you have reached the end of the section at the end of the sectional time limit, or otherwise you might be penalized for not attempting a lot of questions. Right? So that is something you have to keep in mind. In terms of negative marking, there is no negative marking that is a part of the NMAT, and there is no normalization required as well, because it is completely dependent on an individual as to how this person tackles that particular test and what is the score that this individual is getting. And that's why there is no need to normalize between 2 different papers or between 2 individuals. And that's why this is basically completely up to you to answer that particular question and figure out what is the band that you reach. In terms of the scores that you get, you will get a provisional score almost immediately once you submit the test. So as soon as you submit the test, you will know what score you would have got on an immediate basis. And then of course, after a couple of days, you will end up getting your final score, which will be more or less similar or the same as the provisional score that you would have got, unless there are some variances somewhere. But typically what happens is your final score will be the same as your provisional score. Right? So this is basically what happens. In terms of the test, there is one change that happens at the test is you have sectional time limits for each of the 3 sections that are there, but you will be free to choose the order in which you will appear these sections. So what happens is, let's say for example, you have QA, you have logical reasoning and you have verbal ability. You have these 3 sections. Then what will happen in this particular context is that you will be able to figure out, or you will be able to decide which section do you want to appear at in the first go, then followed by which section and followed by which section. So let's say for example, you are very comfortable with QA, quantitative ability, and you decide to take that as the first section, followed by logical reasoning, followed by verbal ability. You are free to choose this order at the beginning of the test. Now once the test starts, you will have to stick to the order that you have committed to, and that is basically how your entire test will pan out. So there are these broad differences that are between the NMAT and the other tests that are there. Now, in terms of the NMAT, a maximum of 3 attempts is typically allowed for every candidate. So in that entire window of 75 days, you can appear for the NMAT for up to 3 times. Just that you have to be mindful of which attempts are going to be considered by the individual institutes. So for some institutes, the highest of the or the best of the 3 attempts will be considered. For many of the institutes, only your first attempt will be considered. So you have to understand which institute you are applying to. So if you are applying to say NMIMS Mumbai or any colleges under NMIMS for their MBA programs, then you will have to have your first attempt to be the best attempt, right? Whereas if you are applying to other colleges outside of the NMIMS university, in many of the colleges you will be able to apply even on the basis of the best of your 3 attempts. So make sure you have clarity in terms of which attempt is the one that is going to be considered by individual colleges. Again, the scheme might change by a bit year on year. So make sure that you are aware of the latest condition that you have to fulfill so as to be able to turn up for the GDPI rounds. Now, in terms of the key differences from the CAT, there are broadly 4 differences that we have come up with in terms of CAT versus NMAT. The first thing, you have to have a section-wise attempt strategy that needs to be formed. So as I mentioned earlier, you have to figure out the order in which you are going to attempt these sections, and that is something which will help you do your best when it comes to this particular test. The second thing is in terms of the presence of grammar, vocabulary based and critical reasoning question types when it comes to the NMAT. So you might have questions that are based on synonyms, antonyms, correct spelling, let's say for example, or in terms of analogous words that will be given to you. In terms of grammar, you might have questions which will ask you to figure out which is the or which is or are the incorrect parts in a particular sentence, which is the most accurate re-representation of a particular statement that would have been given to you, and so on. Similarly, in terms of critical reasoning questions, you might have questions which ask you to strengthen or weaken a particular argument or figure out what an analogous argument will be to the paragraph or the argument that would have been presented to you. In terms of the verbal reasoning question types, there might be a lot of question types that might be new to you if you are planning to take the NMAT, which might include questions that are based on coding/decoding, questions that are based on sequential output, questions that are based on syllogisms, questions that are based on magic squares, and series-based questions that are there, right? So all those question types might be unique to the NMAT and other speed tests, of course, but it will be something that you will have to do in addition to your CAT preparation. And similarly, data sufficiency is one question type which might appear at the NMAT, wherein you will have one statement that will be given to you, and there will be a question that will be asked to you, and you will have 2 additional data points that will be given to you, out of which you might be able to answer the question using one, both, either, or none, right? So even if you combine the 2 statements and try to answer the question, you might not be able to do it. So all these eventualities exist. You have to figure out which of the 4 options will which will help you answer the question that would have been given to you in this step. When it comes to the first section on quantitative skills, you can see that there were a total of 36 questions that were a part of this entire section that was there. And to solve these questions on quantitative skills, you would have taken 52 minutes. So that is the maximum time limit that would have been permissible to you to attempt this particular section. So in terms of quantitative skills, if you look at the question types that we have here, arithmetic comprised of 11 questions of the entirety of the mathematics side of things, followed by modern math, which had 8 questions, followed by algebra and numbers, which are 2 and 3 questions each. So if you look at this entire side of things, you will see that majority of the QA, DI, DS part will be contributed by the mathematics or the quantitative ability part. Similarly, if you look at the data interpretation bit, there were 4 questions per set, and there were 2 sets that were present as a part of the DI part or the DI part of the entire section that was there. And again, these were manageable sets that were present. And similarly, there were some data sufficiency questions that were there. So you can see the entire list of details on your screen, and you can see what all kinds of types of questions are asked at the NMAT. Just that this split might not really be there for all the candidates who would have appeared for the test, because what happens in this particular context is that people who would have appeared for the test even in the same slot or on the same day and at the same time, they would have seen different questions that would have appeared, purely because the test is a computer adaptive test. Now moving on to the next section, which is the logical reasoning section. What happens at the logical reasoning section is that again you will have 36 questions and you will have 40 minutes to answer these 36 questions. So as I mentioned earlier, you will have to ensure that you are finishing each and every question by the time the timer runs out for that particular section. Now if you look at the kind of questions that were there, again this is a part of your screen, so you can just have a look at it and see what all question types are there in front of you. So there were questions based on linear arrangement, grouping and conditionalities, sequential output, wherein there will be a string that will be input into a machine and then there will be sequential outputs that would come out till the time a final step is reached. Similarly, you had questions on logical puzzles, numerical puzzles, Venn diagram based puzzles, and so on. there were quite a few verbal reasoning questions as well. So if you look at the entire construct of the section, 21 questions out of 36 questions were based on verbal reasoning, wherein you would have to figure out the assumptions or conclusions that were implicit in a particular paragraph or a particular statement. Similarly, you have to strengthen or weaken the arguments or provide strong/weak arguments to a problem statement. Similarly, course of action, decision making, critical reasoning based questions, syllogisms, reverse syllogisms. So all those question types were present as a part of the logical reasoning section when it came to the verbal reasoning part. Again, 36 questions, 40 minutes to attempt these 36 questions. Coming to the last section of language skills, there were 36 questions in the language skills section which had to be attempted in 28 minutes. So if you look at the entire construct of the section, you are supposed to answer a question in less than a minute on an average. Now if you look at what happened in terms of reading comprehension, there were 2 passages with 4 questions each as a part of the reading comprehension part. Now again, this is subject to which slot or what is your response to the preceding questions, right? So in some cases, it so happened that people had only 1 reading comprehension passage as a part of their particular test. In some cases, people had 2 reading comprehension passages as a part of their test. So typically 4 questions each, 8 questions were from reading comprehension passage on an average. In terms of jumbled paragraph questions, there were 4 or 5 sentences that needed to be unscrambled and put into a coherent paragraph. So there were 6 questions that were present in the slots that we analyzed. Similarly, in terms of analogies, 6 or 7 questions from analogies, 6 questions from fill in the blanks with prepositions. Again, there were some 3 or 4 questions that were there, and you had to find the error in some of the statements that were given to you. So 36 questions, majority of it would be from the verbal ability part, maybe 4 or 8 questions from the reading comprehension part, and that would complete the entire section. Now, if you look at the language skills part, again, 36 questions to be attempted in 28 minutes. So if you club all the timelines that you had, 52 minutes for the quantitative ability section, 40 minutes for the logical reasoning section, and 28 minutes for the language skill section. Together, you will have 120 minutes to answer 108 questions. So 36, 36, 36, 108 questions to be answered in 120 minutes. You can choose the order of the sections as I mentioned earlier. And of course, for all the question types, you will need to prepare for some areas in addition to your CAT preparation. So that was the entire thing in terms of what happens at the NMAT, what exactly is the computer adaptive test, and what exactly is the split among the sections in terms of the number of questions and in terms of the time limits per question.